Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we talk all things fantasy football. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And we are back with another episode. And, man, what a busy day today has been. This is the third show. We're knocking these out of the park.
Right.
But we're going to end it on a strong note for the fantasy owners out there. For some people, this is the last week of the regular season in fantasy because playoffs do start. For me, I got 2 more weeks of the regular season, so I got 2 more weeks to try to clinch the playoffs.
Yep.
I need to win 2 more times, and I need the person ahead of me to lose twice. I think it could happen.
I mean, sure.
I think it could happen.
I need to win this week to secure it because right now I'm a number 2 seed, but if I lose and the 2 teams below me win, then we're all in a tie for second and third spot. Because the top 3 teams in each conference make it. And right now I'm number 2, but there'll be 3 of us all tie for the same record at 2. And I don't know how the tiebreakers win for that. So I don't want to lose. I want to win this week to secure my spot. And I am not off to a terrible start. The guy I played had only Des Bryant, and he did okay, but he didn't do fantastic. So it at least gets me a little bit of room to do well since I got people like Antonio Brown and DeAndre Hopkins, which we'll get to later. But we'll start.
But
as far as this week, as far as what they did last night.
Yes, we're going to talk about last night's game and fantasy performers from last night. The Dallas Cowboys defeated the Minnesota Vikings 17-15.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people sat Dak Prescott last night because he really, I wouldn't say he looked like a rookie, but from his numbers, looked like it was from a rookie quarterback.
Right, he had a fumble lost, yeah.
And he was 12-18, 139 yards and a touchdown, and he did have that one fumble. And, you know, this is a quarterback, a rookie quarterback that doesn't turn the ball over a lot.
Right.
Minnesota does have a really great defense. But we do have some strong performers from last night in the Dallas side.
Right.
That is Ezekiel Elliott had 86 yards. He had 20 touches through the ground, and he had 4 through the air. So he had a total of 24 touches. He actually did actually cross 100 total yards, and he had a touchdown. So pretty much a solid game from Ezekiel, what you expect.
Right.
He is one of the top, fantasy running backs this year. And on the receiving end, Des Bryant did get 84 yards on 6 targets and a touchdown. He had 4 receptions. So we were talking about this yesterday on the football podcast about how Des Bryant, he either has one big catch, and he had a big catch last night.
That's the thing, right? He had that big catch, and he had a pretty good game. I mean, considering what he did have, you would have hoped he would have done a little bit better, but, he still had 84 yards and a touchdown, so it's a really good game. If you kind of go to NFL.com, 14.4 points. The leader on that was Ezekiel Elliott with 16.5 points. Altogether, the Cowboys had pretty good players going for them for those 2. Sam Bradford's the only one that did anything of note. On the Minnesota side, he had 247 yards and a touchdown and 10 yards rushing. All in all, as far as from a fantasy football perspective, it was okay. It wasn't great. You had a couple of good performances like Elliott, but you had mostly because the offense, there wasn't a lot of points scored. You had a lot of field goals by the Minnesota Vikings, so it wasn't something that you would kind of hope it would happen. This wasn't like you talked about in the football podcast. It wasn't something with the Lions and the Saints, which we assume would be a really, really high-scoring game. But if you had Elliott, which I'm assuming you probably started Elliott, if you had Dez, which I'm assuming you started Dez, you had a good week. I'm assuming people didn't start Sam Bradford unless you're really, really, really.
I don't even think he's on fantasy roster.
He's like at best he's one of those guys that you kind of have as just like a throwaway. It's just like I need somebody else to play. But he did okay. All that's to being said, he still got you a decent amount of points.
And the backfield for the Minnesota, again, does not perform. Jerry McKinnon only had 49 yards on the ground.
Right.
No, 41 yards on the ground. Matt Asiata only had 30. So I think to this point, I just think you just really can't play any Minnesota running backs. There's just no way.
Right.
Jerry McKinnon did have a touchdown, though. That was a touchdown to make it a 2-point game late in the fourth quarter there. He only had 14 yards receiving. So this backfield, and I talked about it way early in the season. I think it was actually your first week when I talked about the Minnesota Vikings backfield when Adrian Peterson got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I said, it's tough to trust this Minnesota Vikings backfield. Matt Asiata is always that guy that can possibly get you 3 touchdowns a game or just none. He hasn't had that game. Matt Asiata is basically a fullback playing running back.
Sure.
That's how their depth is right now. And I just think right now you just have to stay away from this Minnesota Vikings backfield. I can't play. You just can't.
No.
Jerry McKinnon is a backup for a reason.
Right. Yeah, the whole team, the whole offensive side of the Vikings, you pretty much still have no faith in. Maybe you have faith in Stephon Diggs. Maybe at some point you have faith in Sam Bradford. But as a whole, especially on the running back side, that's just anyone on that side, unless Pearson comes back in a couple of weeks, you don't start any of those guys.
Yeah, and you said maybe you can trust Stephon Diggs. And that is true. Stephon Diggs is probably the number one receiver there. But you got to talk about Adam Thielen. He's had a pretty good streak of games lately. He had 86 yards last night, and he had 9 targets. So he's kind of been training towards like the number 2 or 3 option in that passing game. I do think Kyle Rudolph is the red zone target there, who I started. I feel like he should have had a touchdown in the second quarter, but he couldn't get his hands on it, and Bradford threw the 2-point conversion 10 feet in the air, so there's no points for that.
Right.
But, that was a game I expected him to have. I just wish Kyle Rudolph had a touchdown.
Yeah. But I'm with you with Thielen. He's had some good weeks. He had 86 this week. A couple weeks ago, he had 65 and a touch. Before that, he had 21 but a touchdown, 68 yards. He's had pretty good weeks. I said you're not going to get something that you want A.J. Green style, but as far as like your third receiver on the team, maybe your flex, he's a really good guy to just have, especially if some of your guys have gone down. If you have A.J. Green and all of a sudden he's now gone for a little bit of time, if you have someone, like a Jarvis Landry who's been hit or miss, depending on how good Parker's been emerging with the Dolphins, he's a good player that you kind of throw in there to get you a handful of points and save your season.
Yeah. So I think moving forward, I think Adam Thielen is someone you kind of have to roster heading towards the stretch run here. Stephon Diggs, I don't know if you're fine for a playoff spot still. I don't know if he's someone that you have to start. I'm not sure if he's a must start even going to the playoff season. But just for the Vikings overall in fantasy, there's not really too many players you can really trust.
Right.
But, I do think we agree that, for the Cowboys, Ezekiel is probably must start. I do think that Prescott is going to be someone that can be a really good contributor down the stretch. And Dez Bryant is someone that can really be I don't know, he doesn't put up numbers for your top receiver like he used to.
Right.
But he's still a really good receiver to use as your number 2 guy. So I do think he is a very valuable number 2 receiver. But but we're going to take our first break here at the Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, and we're going to talk about a tight end that probably that made a lot of fantasy owners cry the past couple of days. And I'm going to talk about a receiver. Well, I'm going to let Anthony talk about a receiver and why he hates this receiver on his team.
Hate's a strong word.
We did talk about it.
Dislikes.
We did talk about it briefly on the football show.
Right.
But, we'll be right back here at the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And we got some big news for the past week regarding one of the top fantasy players, or tight ends, I might add. And he probably made a lot of fantasy owners kind of cry a little bit because he's such a huge contributor on multiple fantasy lineups, and especially going towards the stretch run and the playoff season. And if you don't know by now, I am talking about Mr. Rob Gronkowski.
Yep.
Yeah, he's going to have surgery, and he's set to miss the rest of the 2016 season. And the Madden curse has striked again. And this is tough for a lot of fantasy owners. So I guess this means that Martellus Bennett is very more valuable now. It makes Malcolm Mitchell actually kind of valuable. Mm-hmm. He's talked about him on the show on Tuesday about being a top waiver wire pickup. But overall, Gronk being hurt, man, very tough news.
It is really tough news. He's had really good games this year. Like, he didn't start off the year. He was injured a little bit, but once he got on the field against Cleveland, he had 109 yards, against the Bengals 162, the Steelers 93. Buffalo 109, like he was just like bam, 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 just getting, and then like all of a sudden, against the Jets, just kind of like had that weird thing, tweaked his back a little bit. Didn't think it was that bad because he got up and kind of walked a little bit, but adrenaline can make your body not hurt as much. Now he's having back surgery, and he's done for the year most likely, and there's reports out potentially this could be something a lot more serious than that.
Yeah, and Gronk has struggled with injuries throughout his 7-year career. The injury to his back could be actually career threatening. Yep. And I'll have you do the little stat that you said on the football show a little bit later. But I'm going to go through his injuries dating back to 2012.
Sure. Yeah.
He had hip and forearm injuries that kept him out 5 games. 2013, back, forearm, ACL, and MCL, and a concussion that kept him out 9 games. Mm-hmm. 1 game in 2015 with a knee. 2016, hamstring, and that lung, the punctured lung. Yeah. And, of course, the back surgery that he's going surgery for, and it has caused him to miss 3 games. And if he misses the rest of the season, I think that is a total of 8 games.
He's someone who's always had the injury problems because he's so big that people tend to kind of like take weird angles to knock him down because you can't necessarily just like tackle him at his chest. He'll just kind of like brush you off like a polar bear and just kind of run past you. And he's one of the most prolific tight ends in the history of football, maybe the best tight end in the history of the NFL. It's just he can't do what someone like, say, Tony Gonzalez did, where he would always be reliable, right? He's so good for a short amount of time, but it's not consistent. It's not something that you can say, oh, yeah, he's going to play 16 games. This year, like I said, he could miss 8 total games. And for those 8 games, congratulations, awesome, it's going to be great, but you got to have somebody else, especially if it's a tight end, you have to have somebody else on your fantasy team who can kind of balance it out for you because outside of that, he's not helping you get to the playoffs if for a decent amount of the season he's not there.
Yeah, and there's a stats I want to pull up with the Tom Brady here. And Tom Brady fantasy owners here that could be kind of daunting, with the Patriots offense overall with and without Rob Gronkowski since 2010. With Gronk, the offense scores 31.2 points per game. They average 391 point total yards a game. And the passing game, they average 279.2. That's with Gronk.
Right.
Without Gronk, it's slightly still good, but they dip a little bit. 26.9 points a game, 382.6, 252.4 passing game. So that speaks a lot to the Patriots offense, but I really want to talk about the impact it has on Tom Brady. And 86 games with Gronkowski, Brady has 104.5 passer rating and a 65.5 completion percentage. Brady's numbers, they dipped to 84.4 to 57.5% without Gronk. So it also hurts Tom Brady's fantasy value in that offense. So basically, in Gronk's absence, is probably the next man up, which is Martellus Ben, who's actually been dealing with a couple injuries himself.
Right.
Brady also has Malcolm Mitchell, who I think is going to have a huge role now in this offense. That's why I think he was a huge fantasy football waiver wire pickup this week. Remember, Deion Lewis is slowly getting back into the offense. So I do think they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's just that I do think the absence of Gronk kind of hurts Brady a little bit.
True. Yeah. No, absolutely. It's something that you have to keep an eye on. It's something that Bennett does help, but also you're losing Gronkowski, and that's something that's obviously crippling to not only Tom Brady but to fantasy owners and everything else like that.
Yeah.
So we'll transition now a little bit to another player who he's healthy.
He's very healthy.
He's very healthy. However, the quarterback hates him. Hates him so much. Now,
and then you talked about them briefly, and he's on your team.
Here's
and you talked about them briefly on the sports show, but I really feel like this is a very good topic to have on this podcast.
Here's the thing. I have both of them actually on my fantasy team. I have Gronk and DeAndre Hopkins.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Here's the thing. DeAndre Hopkins, we all know who he is. We all know how talented he is. Last season he had 1,521 yards and 11 touchdowns. Really, really good. So in my brain, I'm like, okay, great. Let's select him, right? Let's take him for my team. That'll work out well. That'll be great. It'll be something that's fantastic. And to start the year, he was fine. 54 yards, but a touchdown in week 1, 113 yards and a touchdown in week 2. All right, great. Let's go. 56 yards. 4 yards. Okay, everyone has a bad week. 56 yards. Okay, 71, 36, 44, 48, 58, and 70. He has not had a touchdown since October 9th. We are in December. That's almost 2 months. And he hasn't had more than 5 receptions since October 16th. Again, almost 2 months. The man is so good. Brock Osweiler, why do you not throw to him? Why? Just a little bit. You throw him 4 or 5 catches every single game for 50 yards. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit. I'm not asking for a lot. You know who his quarterbacks have been for his career? They've been trashed the entire time. Now you get Osweiler, 6'9" quarterback. He's giant. I know he's not 6'9", but he's giant dude. Can't throw the ball to DeAndre Hopkins. Can't throw the ball to one of the best wide receivers in the game. I'm starting him this week. I'm doing this with my fingers crossed, hoping that it'll be a good game. I have little hope. If you have DeAndre Hopkins, I would say start him, depending on who else your receivers are. But I had Gronkowski, so obviously I have to bench him, probably release him. And now it's just it's the defeated attitude with Hopkins. I don't like it. It's one of those things what do you want me to do? I have him because I thought it was going to be a good season, and then nothing.
I get it. And
he had 1,500 yards last year.
He
has 600 this year.
One of the best
600
fantasy receivers last year.
Unless he gets basically 175 yards a game for the next 5 games, which doesn't matter in fantasy at a certain point because at the end of the season you're not playing if you're not in the playoffs. So That doesn't help me at all. Why couldn't you do this in the first 11 weeks? Huh? Why? How is it that hard? How, Sway? How is it that hard? Anyways.
You don't got the answer, Sway.
Moving on. Anyways.
All right. But I like when you go on these rants, Anthony, for like 5 minutes. I remember that we talked about Josh Brown and how that whole situation.
Josh Brown was
You talked about that for like you were basically the segment. But but yeah, that was good. I feel like you needed to get that off your chest. Do you feel better now?
A little bit.
Okay, cool.
Still sad, but
So getting back to DeAndre Hopkins here, I want to talk about the Houston Texans schedule regarding Hopkins. They do have Green Bay, they have Indianapolis, Jacksonville, and Cincinnati. So it's a pretty good schedule, but like you said,
they could play the Rams. They're not going to throw it to him. They could play the Niners or the Browns. They're not going to throw it to him.
That might be true. I just don't know why Brock Osweiler doesn't throw to him. I just don't know why.
I don't know.
And he could have had a better game against. He could have had a better game against Oakland, Mexico City. He should have had a touchdown in that game.
He threw it to Fedorowicz the whole time.
All right. Anyway, Anthony's getting a little angry here. He needs to get a Snickers bar.
Right.
And we're going to take our last break here. But we're going to get into some starts and sit here. Players you should start, players you should sit. We'll have that for you when we get back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, and it is time to tell you guys who to start and who to sit. And Anthony, I'm going to talk about two players who should start, and the reason why I'm going to do two players, I got a running back and a quarterback, and they're playing in the same game. That are playing against each other. We didn't talk about this game at all because both of these teams are so bad. I got two players from the Chicago Bears and San Francisco 49ers game.
Okay.
Jordan Howard, I think he is a must-start this week.
Okay.
Of the Bears.
Mm-hmm.
It's against the Niners. Okay,
sure.
You have to start everyone against the Niners if you're running back.
Yes.
And Jordan Howard has been pretty much the best offensive player for the Bears this entire season.
Mm-hmm.
The 49ers running defense has been the worst this season, and they look like they're very generous in giving up and helping other fantasy owners out every time they play against a certain running back.
Mm-hmm.
But I do expect a big week for Jordan Howard. I do think he's going to be heavily relied on since Jay Cutler is not going to – he's pretty out for the season. Matt Barkley, who had a pretty good game last week.
Right.
I think he's going to have another good game as well this week. And this is pretty much the dream matchup. I do think Howard's going to do really well. A running back has scored double digits in fantasy points against San Francisco in 10 games in a row. The only team that was held – that was held below that, that double-digit mark was against the Rams against Todd Gurley in Week 1.
Right.
Ever since, the Niners have allowed 17 touchdowns to running backs.
Okay.
And 14 to score double digits in fantasy. 8 running backs have rushed at least for 100 yards, and I think Howard has a chance to do all those things. I do think Howard has a chance to score 20 touchdowns, have like 200 points, and like have like 1,000 yards. That's how bad this defense is. So he's my starter of the week.
That's fair enough.
Okay. And I'm going to talk about a quarterback, and it's not Matt Barkley. That's right. I'm going to go with Colin Kaepernick. I think he's someone I think he's kind of a must start this week against a terrible Bears defense. You know what? I talked about Colin Kaepernick getting back to fantasy relevance, and don't get me wrong, he may not be the best quarterback, but his rushing ability makes him very startable. He's kind of a must start at this point. He's finished like a top 10 quarterback.
Yeah.
The last like 4 weeks.
Yeah, no, he's been really good as fantasy-wise over the last few weeks. He's been somebody who, obviously rushing and passing. He's been kind of unprecedented in that aspect, and he's somebody that you absolutely, need to look at, because you take a look at other quarterbacks, be it Alex Smith, be it my boy Osweiler, be it whoever else, they don't tend to get a lot of points. He'll get you a lot of points rushing and passing. So he's someone, that obviously, if he's anywhere near available, you need to pick him up.
Yeah, so Chicago has allowed 3 quarterbacks in a row to score at least 21 fantasy points, and 5 quarterbacks have reached that total in the past 7 games. So Kaepernick has scored at least 23 fantasy points and 4 games in a row. We had a huge day against Miami last week. Sorry. He did have total of 4 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. He did have over 100 yards rushing against the Dolphins. I think he has a chance to get 100 rushing yards again, and he has a chance to get close to 300 yards again. I do think Kaepernick is going to throw between 3. I think he's going to have 3 total touchdowns. So I do think he's someone that is kind of a must start this week, heading to the final week of the season for some people. Yeah. So what players do you want to start this week?
So for me, I'm saying you start Jameis Winston, and the reason why I'm saying you start Jameis Winston is because you look at who Tampa Bay actually is playing. They're playing the San Diego Chargers, and the Chargers, while not a bad team, they've been playing pretty well as of recently, or kind of like hit or miss. Like they'd have really good games, they've had bad games, but they've always been really close. San Diego actually is in the bottom as far as actual passing yards allowed. They're 24th in the NFL as far as passing defense. So and you take a look at that and you look at how Jameis Winston has played over the season. He's had good games, he's had bad games. He's kind of been a hit or miss thing. But if you look at what he did against the bad teams, right? If you start off the season, thinking that maybe he could actually ascend and be a really good player, because he started off with 281 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Falcons, bad defense. Then he had 2 weeks later 405 yards against the Rams, who actually was a good defense. But then you also had something like 269 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Niners. Again, bad defense. So this week, playing the Chargers, I think you can do the same sort of thing. You can have around 300 yards passing and a couple of touchdowns, and he's somebody who's not exactly as high a radar as somebody like a Drew Brees or an Aaron Rodgers or Brady or someone like that.
Okay, and I totally agree with Jameis Winston that the Chargers have a tough time stopping the pass. Mm-hmm. And, the past couple of weeks, they had trouble defending the opposing quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. But my ultimate sit of the week is Mr. Cameron Newton of the Carolina Panthers. He's playing the Seattle Seahawks on Sunday night, and I think he's someone that you have to sit. Cam Newton he's not been the same guy. I know he had a strong game against the Raiders, but that was against the Raiders defense.
Right.
The Seattle Seahawks, there's only 3 players that have scored. A lot of quarterbacks don't score over at least 20 fantasy points against the Seahawks.
Right.
I'm looking at all the quarterbacks. Not a lot of them have a lot of success. I think Brady, Carson Wentz, and Jameis Winston are the only ones to have scored, I think, the most against the Seattle Seahawks. Mm-hmm. So Seattle has allowed only 3 quarterbacks to score at least more than 20 fantasy points this season. That was against Brady, Wentz, and Winston. I know Cam Newton is probably I think he's a better quarterback than Wentz and Winston right now.
Right.
But he's not better than Brady. You can't do that. So this is a tough matchup going into a tough environment. I do think Cam Newton is someone that has to be avoided this week.
Cool.
Because I do think the Seahawks are going to win this game pretty handily.
Cool. Okay. And for my sit, I'm going to go a little bit of someone you probably don't expect. I'm going to go with Amari Cooper.
Oh, okay.
Because if you look at Amari Cooper, he has 922 yards receiving, which is really good. But over the last 3 weeks against Denver, Houston, and Carolina, all of which have good defenses, 56 yards, 57 yards, 22 yards. He's not been the same. Against the Buccaneers, bad defense, 173 yards, right? But even before that, 29 yards against Jacksonville. He's been very hit or miss. He's had great games. He's had a great game against San Diego, against Kansas City, against Tampa Bay. But he's also had so-so to bad games. And you look at who the Oakland Raiders are playing. They're playing the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills, if you look at their receiving defense, they're pretty high up there. They're 9th. They only allow 2,716 yards, which averages out to 246 yards per game as far as receiving goes. So they're doing one of the better teams, top 10 as far as passing defense goes. And I think that you can expect, Carr to have a good game. I'm not saying he's going to have a terrible game, but I don't think he's going to get it to Cooper as much as you would hope. I think he may get somewhere around 50, 60 yards, but it's not going to be one of those breakout games. And with someone like Cooper, you kind of expect those things because of the total numbers that he has. You think he's one of those receivers, but the fact of the matter is he only has about 5 or 6 of those games, and everything else is just kind of middle of the pack to below.
Okay, that's a very interesting take on why you should sit Amari Cooper. And that concludes our show, Anthony. We had another successful week, a successful day. We knocked out 3 shows in a row. I had fun though.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I did have a lot of fun, but I'm going to be back on Tuesday to discuss the overall recap. I'm going to recap pretty much the overall Week 13. I'm also going to talk about Monday Night Football, and of course, I'm going to talk about waiver wire pickups like I do every Tuesday. Anthony, of course, will be back on Friday. But I'd like to thank you guys for tuning into the show. You can catch the podcast in a variety of formats on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud, and of course on the website gsmcpodcast.com. You can also follow the show on Twitter at GSMC_football and on Instagram at the same handle. That is at GSMC_football. You can also like the show at Facebook at the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And good luck, guys. Good luck on your fantasy matchups this week. Good luck.